Good evening, everybody. You're tuning in to the VBS College of Jewish Studies, and Rabbi Feinstein will be here shortly. We're in a different space today, so we're going to get a little adjusted. In the meantime, go have a cup of coffee, a little cup of tea. If you were here, you would have mandel bread. Maybe you have your own. In any case, we're happy to see you. I'll do a commercial real quick. This weekend is just full of opportunities, right? Oh, and here he comes. Saturday night, Let It Glow, a fun fundraiser for the youth department, for fun activities for kids. And Sunday night, our very first in our VBS concert series, Cantor Barron has worked with a group of composers, and this is a world premiere of a number of new pieces, and it's supposed to be spectacular. So you can go online and buy tickets, or you can buy tickets at the door. But we welcome you, and it's going to be beautiful. 7:30.
The concert Sunday night. Are the tickets, is it just sort of general, get your seat?
There's 3 different levels of tickets. There's VIP, orchestra, and general. All right, we're going to...
If they want to sign up tonight, I can sign them up and make sure that you have your seats for
Great.
Sunday.
Okay, now we're going to get our tech set. You know you have to talk to the microphone for people at home to hear, right? I know you love that, right? So let's see if I lose the camera. The camera's up there, so you sort of have to move that over a little bit. And I'm going to tune into YouTube and check and Facebook to make sure that you're hearing, that we hear you and see you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so let me do that.
Fair enough. Hi. The boutique is beginning. So the whole synagogue becomes a department store. All this chazarai that you didn't know you needed,
Okay.
now you can't live
So
without.
they can't see.
There's nothing much to look at.
No, seriously, they can't see.
I know. I'm not standing behind a podium
But I know you don't want
for
to stand.
10 people. I'm sorry.
Can
This
you
is.
scoot back a little bit more?
I am back as far as I can go without whacking my head on that thing. How's everybody doing? Okay? Good evening.
What should we do?
This is what. Okay, fine. It'll be fine.
I have an idea. Can you sit on the chair, that tire
No,
chair?
this is where I'm going to sit.
Okay, so let's tell everybody what you're doing, so
Can-
they know.
Here, go ahead.
You want me to tell?
Sure.
Okay, hold on, let's stop it. Hi, everybody. Ilana here. I know you can't see me, but this is my voice. The way, unfortunately, the tech is working, you're going to hear an amazing talk from the rabbi. A short talk from the rabbi, he says. He's a little tired. But you're not going to see him. It's sort of like the voice of God. You're not going to see him, but know he's here. And don't worry that there's nothing that we can do. The camera is stationary, and the place he has to sit does not allow you to see him. So I apologize if that's frustrating. Sit back, relax your eyes, and enjoy this wonderful talk.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. No, they're right here. I got plenty more. They're in the file right here. There's lots and lots and lots of them, okay? You don't need to get any more made.
And I just want to remind people that I see you've walked in with coffee. We're not supposed to have food or drink in here. I apologize for that. So maybe let them have the last sip.
Take your last sip.
I'm so sorry. Next, we're dedicating the room next week. After that, we can probably bring it in. But for now,
Brian, you got 2 violations.
Yeah. Brian, you're in trouble. That's okay.
Stand up here.
Okay, everybody well? Good evening. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Everybody okay? Come in. It's cold out. Come on in. They're all stapled. All right, good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's well. Tonight, we're going to conclude our conversation about Abraham Joshua Heschel's religious philosophy and summarize where we've come and jump into something to the third section of that book, God in Search of Man. And I want to take this very special look at one of the most popular of his books, which is the book called The Sabbath. So remember what Heschel's task is as a philosopher. He is a religious man. He is a man who lives his life in a very different way than most of us are used to living. And he comes to this culture, to a secular, scientific, skeptical culture, and he's determined to do three things. First, he's determined to let us understand how a religious person sees the world. So he's going to do phenomenology, which means he's going to bracket for a moment all the truth claims and just let us see the world through the eyes of a religious person. And through the eyes of a religious person, he's going to try to help us by creating a special language to describe the way that a religious person experiences life. And by doing that, he hopes to reawaken something that he believes is endemic to each one of us, deep inside of each one of us. He hopes to reawaken that part of us which sees the world through those eyes. That's his first task. The second task is because he's convinced that in our culture we have no understanding of that way of looking at the world, that we have become so, come on, Louise, everything okay? Good. We have become so accustomed to seeing the world through scientific eyes, that religion occurs to us as a kind of form of delusion, that it's a kind of hypnosis, that it's a deep form of irrationality. And he's going to try to point out that it's not a form of irrationality, it's simply a different way of knowing. So in addition to teaching us how a religious person sees the world, his second task is to validate it and to point out that it's not a form of irrationality, it's not a form of psychosis, it's not a delusion. It's simply a different way of seeing the world that reveals different realities which are objectively part of the world. That's the second thing he's going to do. And the third thing he's going to do is he's convinced that the kinds of experiences that we have encountered in the 20th century, the Holocaust and the deployment of nuclear weapons, and the kind of racism that fills the American South, he's writing in the 1960s, and the various kinds of atrocities across the world, that these are the product of that same scientific way of looking and the loss of the religious way of looking. And so therefore, he's going to make an ethical claim that not only is the religious way of looking part of our human repertoire, not only is it a valid way of understanding the world, a valid way of perceiving a reality that's there in the world, but more than that, it's necessary. It is a necessary counterbalance to a way of looking at life which dehumanizes us and invites us to dehumanize one another. If you want to go one more step, it also invites us to destroy the environment in which we live. And so for Heschel, it is not only that he's trying to explain to us how he sees the world and validate that way of looking at the world. For him, there's a very powerful ethic involved in this. He's trying to save us. He's trying to save us from ourselves. He's trying to save us from patterns of thinking and patterns of behavior that are blatantly self-destructive, but because of the way we experience the world, we can't see that they are self-destructive. We can't see what we're doing to ourselves. We can't see what we're doing to ourselves, and we can't see what we're doing to each other. And so there is a very intimate connection between his religious philosophy, his religious perceptions, and his ethical perceptions and his political activism. And what I want to do today is to deal with the third section of the book. So in the first section of his masterpiece, God in Search of Man, that's the phenomenological part where he's going to talk to us about how does a religious person see the world. And he's developing a vocabulary with words that we know but have never used in these ways. Words like wonder and mystery and awe and insight. And then in the second section, he's going to say The Bible is critical for this process. The Bible is significant because what the Bible does is shape the way that we experience God in the world. In the third section, he talks about what we do, how we act. And you'll see that that is critical as well as a connection between heaven and earth, between the way we live and the divine dimension of life. Now, while he was writing God in Search of Man, he wrote a very short little book. It was actually really a pamphlet called The Sabbath. And it became his most popular book. Today, you can buy it as a regular book. I mean, the publishers blow up the print and, expand the margins and put in some pictures, and they sell it to you for $20 as a book. But in the old days, it was just a pamphlet, basically. And it is his most popular book because in many ways, it is most accessible book. And for those of us who live Jewish lives, it's the most sort of immediately relevant book. So it's quoted everywhere. There isn't a prayer book printed in America or printed in English that doesn't have a section from this book in it. And it's a beautiful, poetic, lyrical vision of the Shabbat. But what's amazing is that you get so lost in the poetic language, you get so hypnotized by the lyrical way that he writes, that you might not notice what is truly interesting and radical about this book. So let's, instead of starting with the bigger philosophy and then going to case studies, let's go the other way around. Let's begin with his case study. He's going to offer us the Shabbat as a case study in religious behavior, and what a religious behavior does for us, and how one ought to appropriate a religious behavior. Now, think for a moment when you were a kid in Hebrew school, if you had to go to Hebrew school, or you went to synagogue and the rabbi spoke about any particular species of religious behavior. Okay? Think about how it's taught. I mean, the first thing that we tend to do is tell you how to do it. All right? And if you're dealing with Shabbat, it's all the things you're allowed to do on Shabbos and all the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Hanukkah is coming, so we'll talk about what's the order that you put the candles in the menorah, and what's the order that you light them, and what does the 4 letters on the dreidel mean? This is how we tend to do it. We tend to begin with the ritual behavior, and then maybe we get around to explaining what the meaning of those behaviors is. Heschel takes that and turns it on its head. He says, forget the behaviors for a minute. Let's begin with the deepest philosophy of what this is about. Shabbat, he'll tell us, from the very beginning, is not about the laws of what you can do and can't do. Shabbat is not about law at all. Shabbat is not about rules, especially authoritarian rules. Shabbat is about something else. Shabbat is about a fundamental approach to how human beings live in the world. And what he's going to ask us to imagine is that there are 2 ways of thinking about how we live in the world: the way of time and the way of space. Space includes stuff, things, objects, all the things in the world that are physical. Time is a different quality. And he's going to make the case that Shabbat is a curriculum in itself. Shabbat is a teaching mechanism to help us appropriate an understanding of time that's very different from our normal understanding of time. So let's take a look. If you look with me on my little booklet here, if you look on the second page where it says the Sabbath, time and space, everybody see that? So this is not taken from God in Search of Man. This is taken from his book, The Sabbath. If you read nothing else of Heschel, because it's kind of forbidding and difficult, this is a book you can read. I promise you, it's not intimidating, right? It's very accessible, and it's interesting. It'll just make you think. Ready? Technical civilization is man's conquest of space. It is a triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing an essential ingredient of existence, namely time. In technical civilization, we expend time to gain space. To enhance our power in the world of space is our main objective. Yet, to have more
does not mean to be more. The power we attain in the world of space terminates abruptly at the borderline of time. But time is the heart of existence. All right, so let's step back a second. European philosophers of Heschel's day and age tended to think about the human condition by offering us dualities, this or that. So Buber, Martin Buber, who was one of his teachers and somebody who was very important to him, Buber taught us that all of life is about the relationships we build, and there are principally two kinds of relationships, I, thou, and I, it. I, it are relationships which are functional. That's when we look at a human being and we imagine that human being, we only see what the human being does for us, what that person does for us. We're not interested in their inner life. We're not interested in their history. We're not interested in their soul. We're not interested in the poetry of their being. We just want to get our groceries checked out and get out to the car. You just want to get the check cashed at the bank. You just want to get through the security line at the airport. You just want to get your soda and your peanuts on the flight. I mean, we look at people all the time and engage them as an it, not as a thou. Okay? And then there are very special times when we break through the world of it, and the relationship becomes personal, and from personal it becomes close, and from close it even becomes intimate. And that's what he means by I, thou. And in I, thou, the other person is completely unique, right? So there are many therapists in the world, but there's only one Judy. And I know Judy's story, and I know her inner life a little bit. And because of that, I don't think of her as just therapist or synagogue goer, right? I think of her as Judy. She's unique. She's precious to me because of that. And we've had a relationship. We have a friendship for many, 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 many years. So Buber tells us that in contemporary life, we tend to privilege I-it relationships because I-thou relationships are hard to get, hard to hold on to, and they take a lot of time, they take a lot of effort, right? And he says the problem is that in losing I-thou relationships, we lose the meaning of life. That's Buber, okay? In a similar vein, in a similar structure of duality, of two, you have the great Orthodox philosopher Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. And Soloveitchik is going to say there's two ways of being in the world, and they correspond to the two stories of creation in the Bible. The first is called majestic man, that is the human being as scientist, as technological creature who goes out in the world and conquers nature and gains power over nature. And the other, he says, is redemptive man who realizes that, who asks the question, what is the meaning of my existence? And again, he's going to use that as a form of social critique. And he's going to say that we privilege majestic man. We're so thrilled about the conquest of nature by technology that we don't give ourselves an opportunity to develop the other side of ourselves, which is the part of ourselves which is seeking closeness, love, relationship, a sense of redemption from our own loneliness. Again, it's a duality. Everybody see that? Here's Heschel's version of the same story, and it has parallels to those. Space and time. So what goes in the category of space, right? Working for things, gaining object, acquiring things, working in the world, controlling nature. Time, he says, is a different dimension of human existence. Time is something very, very different. And focusing on the value of moments is very different than focusing on the value of objects. And he says, but what happens in American civilization, in all civilization, in all, at least capitalists say, is that we sacrifice time for space. Meaning, we go to work and we give up the freedom of our time in order to get paid so we can acquire things, right? We give up time in order to gain space. Yeah, but he says, but if you don't ever stop and ask yourself, what am I doing with my time? You're never going to ask the right questions about what you're doing with your life. Okay? So this is his next line. To gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. That sounds a lot like Buber's I, it, And it sounds a lot like Soloveitchik's Majestic Man. Technological society trying to conquer nature or control nature. The danger begins when in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. That's a very interesting sentence. Look at that sentence again. The danger begins when in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. I remember once my kid was small. My oldest son was small. We were trying to get to school. He was about 5 years old, and he had just learned how to tie his shoes, right? So I said, go put your shoes on. So he's putting his shoes on, and we're late. And I see the kid putting his shoes on, and he's taking his time tying it. Because remember how you tied shoes when you were a little kid? You have to pay attention to everything, and he's being very meticulous. And I remember getting so angry, and I said, come on already, we're going to be late, hurry up, hurry up. You know, and then I stopped myself, and I realized, what are you telling the kid? He's learning how to do, he's a kid. Hurry up doesn't mean anything to a 5-year-old, right? I mean, watch a 5-year-old play. They're like, you know, it's like, hurry up. Like, why are you hurrying? For what are you hurrying? For what purpose are you? Life is all about hurrying, right? It's all about hurrying and hurrying. And Heschel's going to say, you lose a moment. You lose a moment because you're in such a hurry. To get what? To get where? For what purpose? Think of that the way that we govern ourselves in time, how we use time, right? There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have but to be, not to own but to give, not to control but to share, not to subdue but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. So when we become solely economic creatures, whose job it is to acquire and to control and to organize and to subdue, we lose something. We lose a piece of ourselves. It sounds a lot like Buber's I, it, I, thou. It sounds a lot like Soloveitchik. This is a pattern of philosophy which was very, very powerful in the mid-20th century. It's a social critique offering two different ways of being as a duality. We are all infatuated with the splendor of space, the grandeur of things of space. Thing is a category that lies heavily on our... Oh, by the way, so let me just give you one little other secret, because I realized this as I was teaching this the first time many, many years ago. So he's writing this in the middle 1960s, right? Anybody remember the space program? You remember this? So for the young ones among us, sorry, there was a time in the, I guess, 61, 62, when America took on a challenge that the president put in front of us, which was to land a man on the moon and bring him back safely, said John Kennedy. So the first guy to go up was a man named Alan Shepard, remember? And they shot him in the air. Well, first what happens is the Russians sent up Sputnik. That was in 57, 58, and scared the heck out of us, right? And then the Russians sent up a monkey, right? And then brought him back. So we had to set up a guy, you know. So they put the guy in a rocket and they sent him up. And then we sent up another guy. And then the big one was John Glenn. Remember John Glenn? So John Glenn, we sent him up and he orbited the Earth 3 or 4 times and we brought him back. And that was this incredible, was that 64? What year was that? About 63, 64? Yes, I expect you to remember. It's important. So it was this, but what I remember was just what an incredible hero he was. Right? Now, if you saw this movie, Hidden Figures, you know, the only reason we got him back was because of this African-American woman who was a mathematical genius and could figure out, you know, how to get him back. Because, like, things went wrong. And remember, she didn't have calculators like we have. She had an adding machine in her mind and a slide rule. Anybody remember what a slide rule is? Yeah, everyone had one. Yeah. I mean, so this was, you know, and this, so, but the idea was we were going to conquer space. And it was the biggest thing in the world. And Heschel's playing with that. That's part of the double entendre of all these languages, right? When he says, you know, to gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. He's talking about that as a metaphor for the way that 20th century American life was. We'll use our science to conquer space. Space will be ours. So we send these guys up to the moon. Remember this? Was it 69, right? That's when Neil Armstrong lands on the moon, remember? And then we sent a couple of more guys up to the moon. And then it was like, okay, done. Like, all right, that's done. Now what are we going to do? Like, once you get there, like, new, like, we're here. What do you do now? And so what he's trying to help us understand is that there's a different way of thinking. All right, we are infatuated with the splendor of space, the grandeur. The thing is a category that lies heavily on our minds, tyrannizing all our thoughts. Our imagination tends to mold all concepts in its image. In our daily lives, we attend primarily to that which senses are spelling out for us, to what our eyes perceive, our fingers touch. Reality is a thinghood. So anything that's real is a thing, right? Consisting of substances that occupy space. Even God is conceived by most of us as a thing. The result of our thingness, or our thinginess, right, is our blindness to all reality which fails to identify itself as a thing, as a matter of fact. This is obvious in our understanding of time, which being thingless and insubstantial appears to us as if it had no reality. So what is he talking about? He's talking about moments. He's talking about the sanctity of moments. And we think of sacred things and sacred places, but what does it mean to have sacred moments? And what would it mean if you said, I want to create a life which is rich in sacred moments? And I'm not nearly as concerned with acquiring lots of things as I am, things of value, as I am in creating moments of value. In creating moments of value. And what would it mean to change your orientation from sacred things or things of value to moments of value? And that's how he brings us into a discussion of Shabbat. That having a day a week in which we depart from the world of space and we enter into a world of time. Consciousness of space is transformed into consciousness of time. So turn to the next page. Judaism is a religion of time, aimed at the sanctification of time. Unlike the space-minded man, to whom time is unvaried, iterative, homogeneous, to whom all hours are alike, qualityless, empty shells, the Bible senses the diversified character of time. There are no 2 hours alike. Each hour is unique, and only one given at the moment, exclusive and endlessly precious. Judaism teaches us to be attached to holiness in time, to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of the year. Listen, the next line is amazing. The Shabbat, the Sabbath, are our great cathedrals. Our Holy of Holies is a shrine that neither the Romans nor the Germans were able to burn, a shrine that even apostasy cannot easily obliterate, the Day of Atonement. According to the ancient rabbis, the day is the essence, it should be the essence of the day, not the nay. So what does he say? The first thing in the Bible that is called holy is not a space. The first thing in the Bible that is called holy is time. It's time, Shabbat, right. And what does it mean to create? What does it mean to be sensitive to an architecture of time, to an architecture of moments, a topography of moments? And what does it mean to create sanctuaries in time? Okay, you go to France, you go to Paris, a lovely city, and right in the middle of Paris is an island, and on that island is the most magnificent church called Notre Dame. And you walk in, and it's like, whoo, amazing, right? You go to Rome, there's any number of churches in Rome. There's certainly the Vatican, St. Peter's, right? But there's any number of great churches in Rome. And then you say to yourself, where are the synagogues that match these churches? Like, well, maybe Wilshire Boulevard, but you know, but where We don't. That's what Heschel's trying to say, is we never created buildings like that. We never imagined that a building is the place in which God lives. God doesn't live in a building, at least not since the first century. God lives in moments of time. God lives in moments of time. And the whole purpose of Judaism is not to create great buildings, it's to create great moments. And the great purpose of life is not to create great buildings or great objects, but to create special moments. And special moments, the cultivation of special moments, is the sensitivity that Shabbat teaches us. So that the Sabbath comes not as a set of rules or a set of rituals. The Sabbath comes as a way of teaching us how to think about life in a completely radical and completely different way. A completely radical and different way. So there's a wonderful Hasidic story. Now here's the Hasidic story. The Hasidic story is, there was a group of Hasidim came to the Rabbi with a question. Is Shabbos Shabbos because it's special on the day? Or is Shabbos Shabbos because we make it Shabbos? So the Rebbe says, let's make an experiment. Let's declare Tuesday Shabbos. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home and tell your families that Tuesday is Shabbos. I want them to clean the house, cook the meal, get dressed. I want you guys to come to shul Tuesday afternoon or Monday afternoon. And we're going to see if we can make a Tuesday into Shabbos, right? So they go home and they clean the house and they get dressed and they come back and they daven Shabbos Monday afternoon. And they sit down on Tuesday morning to a meal with challah and wine. And then they all come back really dejected. And they say, Rebbe, a terrible thing happened. He said, what happened? It felt like Shabbos, but it was Tuesday, right? And so what did the Rebbe say? It felt like Shabbos because it was Tuesday. So what did he say? He said, of course it did, because you are commanded to make Shabbat. The Shabbat is not anything about the day itself. You have to make it. It's the meeting point between your will and your action and the possibility that the day presents. And with a little challah and a little wine and some white clothes and some nice song and a nice meal, you can make a Tuesday into Shabbos. And that's the point, that you have to learn how to sanctify this day. That the day itself doesn't carry sanctity unless you sanctify it, unless you're sensitive to the sanctification of it, unless you're a partner in the creation of that day. And that's what Heschel's trying to talk about. That it's a meeting point between man and God in a moment. It's a meeting point between man and God, human beings and God, in a deed, in an action. And that's what actions do. They're the meeting place between us and God. All right, everybody take a breath. They're a little abstract, I know. Are we cool? So I'm trying to break through, so please. How did it get to be Friday? The Bible says, Tivra on Friday, Yom HaShishi. Friday, yeah, it said God finished the work of creation on Friday, and then on Shabbat he rested. Now, we count days the night before. So it got to be the night before. So Friday ends at sundown, and Saturday begins Friday night. And so we sanctify the separation between the week and Shabbat on Friday night.
So there were weekends that far back?
Well, the Jewish tradition created Sabbath. The Romans thought we were nuts, taking a day off of work a week. They thought we were crazy. But the Jews said, no, this is a sanctified day. Now, there were big debates early on. What makes it sanctified? How do you sanctify it? What makes it sanctified? But the idea of taking a day away from the economic activity, not just work, it's anything economic. You're not allowed to handle money. You're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to make yourself into an economic character, an economic player for this day, right? You're going to back away from that whole aspect of life, and you're going to spend the day cultivating other parts of the self. Says Heschel, you're backing away from space and living in a day of time. 6 days you can devote yourself to the acquisition of things. 6 days you can devote yourself to the conquest of the world of space, One day a week, you're going to concentrate on that aspect of your life which is entirely spaceless. It's time. And on cultivating precious moments. And on recognizing how moments are. So take a look at the last paragraph here, right? The meaning of Shabbat, of Sabbath, is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to holiness and time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share what is eternal in time. It's an interesting phrase, eternal in time. To turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. So what does it mean for one day a week to step away from all of the things that we deem sacred and special and important to us, for one day a week to step away from that? Why do you have 2 challahs on the table? Because that means you don't have to work the next day. You won't starve. I mean, that's why there's 2 challahs on the table. Because it's an image that I don't have to go to work tomorrow morning. I don't have to engage the world as an economic player. I can engage the world to enjoy it and to cherish it and to enjoy the time that I have with the people that I have. That's the sense of time. I'll tell you one of the reasons why this is particularly interesting to me at this moment is because I've been spending a lot of time thinking a lot about, working a lot about, I talked to Judy about this, a lot about retirement. I wonder why, you know. But people who are retiring from work. And one of the phenomenon, and you all know this because you've heard friends talk about this, is especially men. Women are catching up. But especially men, when a man stops his working life, he loses his identity. And he's faced with this ridiculous situation. It's a ridiculous situation because it's absurd, right? He doesn't know what to do with himself. He doesn't know what to do with himself, you know? So American life gives us this, we have this category of retirement, right? You're supposed to wear polyester and eat at Denny's at 4 o'clock and play golf 4 days a week and move to Scottsdale or you know, Leisure World. What a great word, Leisure World. But think about what does that mean? Like, how long could you live in Leisure World before you get bored to death? No, seriously. And how many people do we know who how many people do we know that the day that he gives up his full-time working life becomes so bereft of purpose and identity that he can't stand living in the world anymore? Now, how would Heschel describe that? That's a person who invested so much of himself in the world of space and so little of himself in the cultivation of time that when suddenly he was faced with an abundance of time, he didn't know what the hell to do with it.
It seems he didn't understand that Heschel, in using the word moments, said those are the precious things, and if you collect them, you'll know what to do when you're retired, because you'll have a path to those things.
Right.
And you will, it'll be different.
Right.
And that's the whole point, because I also thought moments give memories.
Or memories are moments. Memories are what's left of moments when we're done with them. Right.
And so building those
Right.
is also
Right.
use of time.
Right. Right. Moments are, we maintain memories of those moments even after they're gone.
Right.
We hold them on, we hold on to them. And because they are what gives us meaning in our lives, they're what life is all about. So I'll give you a beautiful phrase for this. You want to hear a great phrase for this? There's a prayer that we say when we lose a loved one. It's called El Male Rachamim. It's a prayer at the cemetery, and it's also a prayer we say it in Yizkor. The last line of that prayer, Vayitzror b'tzor achayim et nishmato, or nishmata, which is translated as bind this life into the bonds of your eternal. So the Hebrew word vayitzror, it's a very strange and rare word. So one day I was at home and I was looking at that prayer for some reason, and I wanted to figure out what that word meant because I don't know the word from Hebrew. So my wife, thank goodness, my wife is a great scholar of Hebrew, and she has a number of really, really first-rate dictionaries. So I looked up this word in her powerful dictionaries, and it turns out that the word yitzror, or tzror, it's a funny word, tzror, comes from the world of jewelry making. And here's what it means. A jeweler has all of these gems and beads to put together into necklaces and bracelets and things like that, right? So how does he keep, or she keep track of them so they don't roll off the table? Well, what you do is you take a filament, a piece of string, or a piece of thread, or a thong, a piece of leather, and you tie a big knot at the bottom, and you put the beads on that string. And then you tie a knot at the top, and now the beads are held fast on the string, and they won't roll off the table. Anybody following this? All right? The Hebrew word, tzror, means the big knot at the end of the thread. So you don't lose them. So when you say to God, Vayitzror b'tzor ha'chaim, what you're saying is what Judy just said so beautifully. Dear God, take all the precious moments of this life, put them on a thread, tie the knot fast so that you don't lose them and we don't lose them. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a wonderful thing? Right? And that's, by the way, if you go to the cemetery and you see some Hebrew letters, it's five Hebrew letters at the bottom of a grave, Taf, Nun, Sadik, Vayitz, it's Tehei Nishmato Tzura B'Tzura Chaim. May this soul be tied up on the thread in God's jewelry collection. May the moments of this life never be lost to us. Now that the body has gone, but the moments still live with us because we preserve the moments with a big knot at the bottom. Isn't that beautiful? So that's what Heschel's talking about. So for Heschel, but this is what I want you to see. You ask a rabbi to tell you what the laws of Shabbos are, you get a lecture on what you're allowed to do. You know, you can't turn on lights, can't turn on the forget all that. Shabbos is an education in a way of looking at the world which is completely contrary to contemporary ways of looking at the world. It is a counterculture. And it is a counterculture which is terribly deep. And now he's going to go back. The rest of the book I didn't give you, but what he's going to tell us is, now when you look at all of the rules of Shabbat, all of the practices of Shabbat, connect them back to this idea of moments, of learning how. It's a pedagogy. It's a way of learning how to sanctify moments, preserve moments, understand, perceive moments. So Judy was once the president of this temple, which is a job that you wouldn't want to wish. And one of the reasons why, I'll tell you one of the reasons why, because you remember this, because this happens to all of the people who have given themselves, we'll have a bar mitzvah here, or a bat mitzvah, right? And the parent or the grandparent comes up afterwards very angry. Something was wrong. Somebody didn't get the aliyah they were supposed to get, or somebody wasn't given the time to speak a speech they were, or the room was too cold, or the microphone didn't work, or the light wasn't right. And poor Judy, who's so sensitive and so, listen carefully. Say, you're right, I'm so sorry. And what you're thinking in your head is, your child just got up to celebrate 13 years of life. Your child is healthy, you're healthy to see this. I mean, it's this moment of utter wonder and mystery and joy, and all you can think about is Uncle Saul didn't get to say his bracha, or the room was too cold, or the light kept flashing on and off, and that's all you could, you missed the moment. Sometimes I watch, I'll give you another, I shouldn't do this on the camera because I'm going to get in trouble, but when I was a young parent in the 1980s when video cameras were invented. And in the old days, they weren't like these things, these phones we bring. They were these giant things that you had a big thing over here and a camera. And I remember we had a school play or something, and all of the daddies bring these giant cameras, right? Even now, they all bring these damn phones, right? They're taking pictures. And I always want to say to these people, put away the phone. You're going to sacrifice the moment to the task of recording the moment. So you're going to get so obsessed with recording the moment that you didn't experience the moment. Did you ever see? And it's like, put away the damn phone and sit here, and there's your pitzkalach, there's your kid, right? There's the kid. Enjoy it. Because I got news for you. She's 3, he's 5, she's 7, he's 9. This ain't going to last very long. You blink your eyes and the kid's going to be at Berkeley calling you a bourgeois, capitalist pig. So, sorry, I didn't mean that. That wasn't for you guys. I'm sorry. Your kid will never call you that. But, well, probably, maybe, but we'll see. She's a scientist, so she's going to be okay. So, but no, like, look at the moment. You wonder, they sacrifice the moment in order to get a record of the moment. So what happens? You go home and then you watch it and how does this work, right? All right, so that's enough of that. So turn to the beginning. Yeah, Brian, go ahead. Please, save me, Brian, save me before I say something else grossly offensive to the Jewish world.
That's okay, we love it.
I know, I hope you do.
This space-time duality thing,
Yeah.
right? For some reason, you got me thinking about that scene we read about in the Torah a couple of weeks ago, where Jacob's sleeping on a rock and the stairway to heaven and all. And I think isn't there a line that says God was in this place? But I
Yeah.
didn't know it's something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe space is the thing that young folks kind of focus on because they don't know the value of time yet or something.
That's beautiful. It could be, yeah. Yeah. That could very well be.
Because I value my time and my moments more than I did when I was young.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what wisdom is as you grow older. You value the moments more than you need the stuff. And you realize that the stuff isn't worth giving up the moments for. And maybe that's a beautiful way to put it. That's a beautiful way to put it. I'm going to offer the following idea. So Heschel is going, in this particular section, Heschel is using the Sabbath as not just as a study of the Sabbath, not just as a study of a Sabbath as a ritual, but he's offering this as a case study in how a ritual works. Ritual is a symbolic action. Religion is filled with rituals. We do these symbolic actions. Some of them have direct impact on the lives of people around us. All right, so you have a friend in the hospital, and you go over and you hold their hand and spend time with them. That's a symbolic, that's a ritual, that's a mitzvah. That's an action that we do, and it has a direct action on the person who's sitting there, right? Some of them are not direct actions. Well, let me put it this way. Let me go back a second. No, let me correct that. All of them affect, even the ones that affect another person, affect us too. That is, you become a different person from sitting in a hospital holding somebody's hand, right? So giving tzedakah, giving charity, changes the person who receives the charity, but it also changes the giver. It also changes the giver. It reorients you in the world. Any ritual act, whether it has a direct effect on the world or not, changes you. And it changes you in a very interesting way. It changes the context of your life. Think about giving charity. It's the time of year when you get a lot of solicitations. I get tons of them now. First there was Giving Monday, and then there was a Schnorring Tuesday, and there was Groveling Wednesday, and there was, Begging Thursday, and But think about, you give charity. So all the time you're making money. I'm making money. I'm acquiring money for whatever good reasons. I want to support my family. But when I open my hand and I give charity, I change my attitude. I change my orientation to the world. Heschel is very aware of this. And he wants us to become very aware of how every act, every mitzvah, every ritual act in that sense changes us. And what it teaches us and how it changes our attitude toward the world. And that's what he's going to get to. So let's take a look back at the beginning. This is back to God in Search of Man, the masterpiece work. So the first thing we're going to remember is that he talks about moments. He talks about religion coming in moments. The ultimate insight is the outcome of moments when we're stirred beyond words, of instants of wonder, awe, praise, fear, trembling, and radical amazement, of awareness of grandeur, of perceptions we can grasp but aren't able to convey, of discoveries of the unknown, of moments in which we abandon the pretense of being acquainted with the world, of knowledge by inacquaintance. These are all of his phrases. This is his sort of summary statement. We get these moments, and the moments shake us and change us and open us up, and we come to understand that life is bigger than we thought it was before. It is at the climax of such moments that we attain the certainty that life has meaning, that time is more than evanescence, that beyond all being there is someone who cares. That's a summary of the first third of the book, God in Search of Man. We have these moments. All of us have had these moments, right? We've all had these moments. We've all had these moments of children entering the world and having special moments. We've all had the moments of seeing extraordinary beauty in the world. We've all had moments of extraordinary kindness. We've all had moments of redemption, of being saved by something, from something or another, and suddenly you just think of the world differently. Now, it doesn't last very long. It doesn't really, because the phone rings, the tax bill is due, right? You get an itch on your foot, but and then you go back to being the same old schlepping person I was before. But for that moment, life was different, right? For that moment, life was, my daughter called and said, "You're a grandfather." For that moment, my life was different. And yeah, but you see, the moment of the surprise was the moment, and then it goes on. But it just that, the moment, right? The essence of Jewish religious thinking does not lie in entertaining a concept of God, a God idea, but in the ability to articulate a memory of moments of illumination by his presence. It's those moments that change us. Israel's not a people of definers, but of witnesses. So how do we get those moments? And what do you do with those moments? And what are all these rituals? Well, here's what I want you to imagine. You ready? Your ancestors, my ancestors, had those moments. So you know what they did? They freeze-dried them. They took the moment, what? Freeze-dried them. Preserved them. Okay? They preserved the moment. The moment. Preserve the moment, right? And they said, here, it's now yours. All you got to do is reconstitute it. And that's what a ritual is. A ritual is somebody's moment of earth-shaking meaning that was given to us as a gift, right? I'll tell you, so here's one way to think about this. So I'm at a home where they're commemorating a Shiva. And I'm nosy. So I go looking at photographs. And I look at photograph albums. And I find a picture in the photograph album of the whole family, I don't know, on a cruise or at a bar mitzvah. And I'll say to my friend, "What's this?" And my friend gets tears in his eyes. And he says, that was Papa's birthday. We all went on a cruise together. Right? So what happens at that moment is that that picture invites that person back into the moment. Right? It invites that person back into the moment. Anyone here, I'll give you one that'll make you cry. Anyone here have a piece of music that when you hear it, it brings you back into a moment? Right? They're playing our song, Right? Anyone have that kind of or a photograph or an object that you touch and suddenly you're back in that moment again? Back into a moment of meaning, of being touched, of being emotionally engaged, right? Sometimes this happens, right? That's what Heschel's talking about. That's what he means by deeds. Knowledge of God is knowledge of living with God. Israel's religious existence consists in three inner attitudes: engagement to the living God whom we're accountable, engagement to Torah where his voice is audible, and engagement to his concern as expressed in mitzvot. So, the first one is when we meet God in the world, we have these moments and we remember those moments, even in moments when we're not meeting God in the world. And the second one is hearing God's voice in Torah. Now, what is the essence of divine, what is the essence of God as we experience God in this world? Heschel says the essence of God in this world is God's care, God's concern. And what we do is when we do a mitzvah, we are aligning ourselves with God's care. So when you go and sit with your friend in the hospital and hold their hand, and you see their face brighten up, you're contributing to that person's healing and strength and life. You're giving them a piece of your life. The Chinese have a wonderful phrase for this. They call it qi, C-H-I, qi. Qi is life energy. And when you go to a friend in the hospital, what you're doing is giving them some of your qi, right? Or if you've ever been in the hospital or been sick and someone came to take care of you, they give you a little qi. You feel it, right? You feel their life energy. You feel, that's why, by the way, why we come for Shiva. Because what you're doing in Shiva is you get like a whole bunch of people to bring a whole bunch of chi into the room, and it gives the mourner back life. You're bringing the mourner back to life. You can't bring the deceased back to life, but you can bring the mourner back to life by sharing your life energy. So this is what he means by acts that express God's concern, okay? In our response to God's will, we perceive God's presence in our deeds. God's will is revealed in our doing. In carrying out a sacred deed, we unseal the wells of faith. A Jew is asked to take a leap of action rather than a leap of thought. So in Protestant theology, there's something called a leap of faith. This was Kierkegaard's idea, which is we have to imagine God's real and start behaving that way. Jewish tradition never asks you to do that, right? When the stranger comes to Hillel and says, teach me the whole Torah on one foot, Hillel doesn't say, you got to believe that God is real. Hillel doesn't say, you got to believe anything. What does Hillel tell him? That which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That's the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Meaning, when a guy comes and says, teach me your religion, what Hillel tells him is how to behave in the world. He doesn't tell him how to believe. He tells him how to behave in the world. Now think about that for a minute. Why is that? Because that's Jewish idea. The Jewish idea is that you will behave your way into right thinking before you will think your way into right behaving. That once I get you doing acts of goodness, you will begin to believe that there is goodness in the world. Right? I think I told you this story. The Shner Zalman, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, was once asked by one of his disciples, what do I do in those moments when I lose God? And Shner Zalman was the first Chabad rabbi. The last guy was the seventh. This is his great-great-great-great-grandfather. And he said, in every religious life, there are going to be moments when you lose faith. Every religious life has moments when you can't believe God is real. What do? You do one act of selfless goodness. Go feed the sick. Take care for the sick. Feed the hungry. Protect the vulnerable. Do tzedakah. Do tzedakah. And what happens? You feel God in your fingers. Right? This is my argument with kids. Every 13-year-old at Valley B'Shalom has a crisis of faith 2 weeks before their bar mitzvah. Especially the ones with nervous mothers. The ones with calm mothers, they seem to believe in God. But the ones who don't, I get these hysterical calls. Rabbi, help me. What happened? My son just told me he doesn't believe in God. I say, okay, your son's 13 years old. He's supposed to tell you that. Plus other things he's going to tell you. Wait, And she says, how can he have a bar mitzvah, right? So the kid comes to me. I say, send him to me, right? So the kid says, I don't believe in God. I say, oh my God, you're the first one, Today, So how do you convince a 13-year-old to believe in God? You can't, because he's 13. He's not supposed to believe in God. You're supposed to every 13-year-old is supposed to be Spinoza. I mean, come on, that's how it works. But so I have to give him an argument. So I say, okay, you give charity? Of course I give charity. I'm giving charity for my bar mitzvah. Good. What are you giving it? Giving to the American Cancer Society. I said, how come? He says, because my grandfather died of cancer. So your charity is going to do what? It's going to help the scientists find a cure, and we're going to cure cancer. I said, okay, good. I like that. So let me ask you a question. How do you know cancer can be cured? I said, what? I said, how do you know cancer can be cured? Maybe cancer is incurable. Maybe it's theoretically incurable, not just practically incurable. He said, it can be cured. All disease can be cured. I said, how do you know? Here's the bigger question. How do you know that any act of charity is effective? How do you know that there isn't a constant amount of misery in the world? And that if you correct the misery over here, more of it will rise up over here. And if you go take care of it over here, more of it will rise up over. Look, before there was cancer, there was Ebola, and before there was Ebola, there was AIDS, and before there was AIDS, there was tuberculosis, and before there was tuberculosis, there was cholera and typhus and I mean, it seems like we always have like, how do you know that there isn't a constant amount of misery in the world and you can't fix it? It's the Buddhist idea, by the way, but it's another story. How do you know? The kid says, I don't know. I just believe that you can fix things. I said, good, me too. That's God. You can't know that. That's not empirical. That's a belief. You and I believe that the misery in the world can be ameliorated, that the world is so constructed that our efforts can lower the net amount of misery in the world at any one moment, and that the world's waiting for us to do that, right? Right, good, you're a believer. Kid says, really? I say, yeah, go home. But that's what he's trying to say. When we do an act of tzedakah, we are affirming something, and we're changing our whole attitude to the world that we live in, because we're taking responsibility for the world. We're taking responsibility for the way the world is. So he says, a Jew is asked to take a leap of action rather than a leap of thought. I can't prove to you that the dollar you give to the American Cancer Society is the one more dollar it's going to take to cure the disease. But I want you to believe that. I want you to believe that your act of goodness makes a difference. And there's no way to prove that empirically. That's an act of faith. That's a leap of action, not a leap of thought. He is asked to surpass our needs to do more than he understands in order to understand more than he does. Because sometimes you don't understand these acts. You do them and then you understand them. Right? What couple understands what it means to marry? I met with a beautiful young couple today, a kid I helped raise in this shul. He met this amazingly wonderful woman. They're crazy in love. They sit in my office groping each other. It's a machaya. I'm not groping, they're cuddling, Yeah, and I'm thinking to like all of us who have been married, it's like, you kid, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into, but it's good. Go do it. Because if anybody at age 28 knew what marriage was, then no one would get married. It's too scary, right? It's vulnerable. It's trying. But we do it. Why do we do it? Because you jump in. You believe it's going to be wonderful.
But there are moments when
I know.
God helps
Well, that's the point.
in the whole.
God helps all of us. Otherwise, none of us would be married, right?
And in raising children the same way.
And raising children's even worse. If anybody told you how scary it would be to raise kids, like raise hamsters. They're a whole lot easier. Jeez, Louise, right? Louise, there's Louise.
I'll tell you about a God shot. I call them God shots.
Yeah?
My daughter was about 3, and I was putting on makeup, and she came running up to me.
Yeah.
My daughter was about 3.
Your daughter was 3, and you're putting on makeup,
She
yeah.
came running into me, stamped her foot, and said, "God damn it," whatever. And I turned around, and I said to her, "I can see you're upset, but it's gosh darn it." She said, "Oh, gosh darn it." Now, if someone had said to me, I would be able to switch the God.
Oh, wow.
I call those God shots.
I love it. I love it.
That's what we get lucky about.
All right, so here's Heschel. Ready? Look at the next paragraph. It is in deeds that we become aware of what life really is, of our power to harm and to hurt, to wreck and to ruin, of our ability to derive joy and bestow it upon others, to relieve and increase his own other people's tensions. It is the employment of his will, not in reflection, that he meets his own self as it is, not as he should be.
It is in deeds that man exposes his imminent as well as suppressed desires. The deed is a task, a trial, and a risk. What we may perform may seem slight, but in the aftermath is... So it's when we do things, we do things without fully understanding the full implications of what we're doing. And then once we do the deed, it's only in the doing of the deed, it's only in the engaging with another person in a relationship, it's only when raising the child, it's only in giving the charity, it's only in doing the deed that we fully understand how many of us, I didn't want to go to the hospital. I was tired, and getting into the hospital is a pain in the neck, and what am I going to say when I get there? But when you get there and you hold your friend's hand and you say, listen, I'm here. You look better than I was hoping. I mean, you look great. I mean, I hope you're doing... And somehow in that moment, the deed is bigger than our intention. We can never measure the impact of an act before we do it. The deed is bigger than our intention. And you can never know what it's going to be until you do it. So Heschel says, go and do. That's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is you go and do the deed, not fully comprehending all of the implications of the deed. Because you can't do a cost-benefits analysis before you do it. You can only figure out the benefits and the cost after you've done it. So economically, it makes no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense, because rational thinking would say you measure the costs and the benefits and you make a decision whether or not to do this thing. But a mitzvah you go and do anyway. You go and do anyway, because you never know what's going to happen next. And you never know your full power to affect the world. And this is what he means. And this is what he means when he talks about doing a deed, right? That not particular acts, but life itself can establish a link between man and God. And that's what he talks about. That's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is when we act like God in the world. So turn to the next page, and the top page. Each of these statements is so like pregnant, and I didn't know which ones to choose, so I just chose a bunch of them that I love. The destiny of man is to be a partner with God, and the mitzvah is an act in which man is present, an act of participation, while sin is an act in which God is alone. Such acts of man's revelation of the divine are acts of redemption. The meaning of redemption is to reveal the holy that is concealed. So what he's trying to say is that in every act, we bring God into the world. We bring God into the world. So think about that Hasidic story. The Hasidim were sad because they wanted to believe that there's something objective about Friday night and Saturday that makes it Shabbos. And what they discovered was that if you put on nice clothes, you gather your family around the table, you put on a nice meal, you make kiddush, you light candles, you sing songs, you give brachas, you give love, it becomes Shabbos, even if it's Tuesday. You have the capacity to bring God into the world. That's the whole notion of sanctifying Shabbat. And each of us has this capacity. And now Heschel, now let's go back to our other idea. 3 levels of this. Number 1, that's how a religious person thinks about doing a mitzvah. A religious person does mitzvot, lives a life of ritual acts, not because he or she is commanded to do it, but because he or she wants to live a life in alignment how they understand how God acts in the world. We become the hands of God in the world. That's how a religious person thinks about mitzvahs, about religious acts. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, Heschel's going to say, that's not delusional, because all of us know moments that have changed us. And all we're talking about when we're talking about doing a mitzvah, doing a sacred act, is cultivating a pattern of behavior that includes these sacred acts, becoming sensitive to these sacred acts. And all of us can understand that. But then here's the third one. You ready? We need to cultivate that, because if we don't, 2 things happen. What happens to us and what happens to the world. What happens to the world is that we behave like consumers and like manipulators in the world, and we don't appreciate, we don't fully gather in the preciousness of the people we're with, and we don't really protect the world as it ought to be protected. We act as conquerors. And what happens to us is we lose a daily sense for the meaningfulness of existence.
And that's the great disease of modernity. The great disease of modernity is to live without a sense of meaning and to live without a sense of compassion, to live a life of moral callousness. So here's at the end. In 1960, Heschel translates and publishes his doctoral dissertation, which was on the biblical prophets. Remember, we talked about this last week. The prophets were the ones who said, Heschel was the one who said, the prophet is the man who can feel God's pain in the way that we treat each other in the world. Divine pathos, God's sorrows, God's pain. And as he publishes this stuff, where he talks about acting in a way that's not just in obedience to a voice that says, Feinstein, don't eat lobsters, but rather it's a way of aligning yourself with a God who wants compassion in the world. Heschel then leaves behind the totality of his academic life, stops writing long books, and he goes into the world as a social activist. He goes into the world as a social activist because he's acting out the philosophy that he's teaching. So 2 of his books, the book called The Insecurity of Freedom, has a series of addresses that he made. The newer book, the one that came out just a few years ago, called Spiritual Grandeur and Moral Audacity, which his daughter published posthumously, has a lot more of his stuff. So I'll give you just 2 examples of Heschel, the social activist, and how a man sees the spiritual dimensions, the religious dimensions of social activism, right? So in 1963, before he was killed, Kennedy invites major civil rights leaders to the White House for a conference on race and religion. And Heschel is asked to give an address. This is what he writes. At the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses. Moses' words were, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go," while Pharaoh retorted, "Who is the Lord that I should heed his voice? I don't know the Lord." The outcome of that summit has not come to an end. Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Negro, a black person, to cross certain university campuses. Let us dodge no issue. Let us yield no inch to bigotry. Let us make no compromises with callousness. Here's a man who was a refugee from Hitler's destruction. And he sees in the racism of the American South in the 1960s a repetition of the same pattern. And the intransigence of racism, the stubbornness of racism, he sees as the same evil that destroyed his family in Europe. And that's how he puts the whole thing. And so that for him, there's no such thing, and this is going to get people really upset, there's no such thing as a separation between politics and religion. Right? Rabbis, you might find this hard to believe, but rabbis are counseled today, like, don't speak politics from the pulpit. When we come to shul, we don't want to hear about politics. So Heschel begins his statement by saying, the first conference on race in America took place between Pharaoh and Moses. I mean, look what he's doing. He's placing the American racial issue at the very heart of a Jewish narrative. Or the other way around. That the Jewish narrative is at the very heart of the American racial. You can't make Pesach without talking about racism in America. I mean, think about what he's trying to say here. Don't tell me that politics doesn't belong in your religion. This has been a political religion since day one. The whole religion is about God saying to Pharaoh, let my people go. It's a struggle of power, right? Go a little farther. Religion and race, how can the two be uttered together? To act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart, to remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child. To act in the spirit of race is to sunder, smash, dismember the flesh of living humanity. Is this the way to honor a father, to torture his child? How can we hear the word race and fear no self-reproach? Right? Racism, at the end, racism is worse than idolatry. Racism is unmitigated evil, right? Few of us seem to realize how insidious it is. So this is his answer to race. And by the way, it's 5 pages long. I just gave you 3 paragraphs. And it's this intense in every single phrase. This is how intense this man was. When this man was on his pulpit, and this is his pulpit, there was just, right? Then another thing he does, just to give you another glimpse of this, is you may remember that we fought a war in the 1960s called Vietnam. At a certain part of that, at the height of that war in 1967, there were 500,000 American soldiers fighting in South Vietnam. And you all remember it. It was, some of you remember. I'm sorry for those of you who don't remember. You're probably better off. But you remember that every night on the news, CBS News would tell you how many people died this week, Yeah, there would be 12 Americans and 28 South Vietnamese and 1,500 North Vietnamese in Viet Cong. And if you added it up, God knows how many. And there was a certain point at which it became so clear that this was just futile. And that the more futile it became, the more evil it became, that we were killing people for what? So Heschel joins an organization called Clergy and Laity United Against the War. And he becomes the chairperson. And his intensity, people were disturbed by his intensity because they wanted a compromise. They, peace with honor and take your time, withdraw slowly. He was just, there was no compromising with this guy. So this is his statement. This was the moral outrage of Vietnam. It's called, listen, and you'll appreciate this because this is very relevant. It is weird to wake up one morning and find that we have been placed in an insane asylum. It's just, isn't that great? I mean, think about how many moments in the last several years we've all felt that way, right? Right? I don't want to get political. Don't get mad at me. Okay? I'm reading Heschel. It is even worse, it is even more weird to wake up and find that we have been involved in slaughter and destruction without knowing it. What is being done by our government is done in our name. Our labor, our wealth, our civic power, our tacit consent are invested in the production and use of napalm. Napalm, you remember, was a weapon that was made by the Dow Chemical Company that was like liquid fire. And it was the most horrifying thing that you'd ever seen. The bombs, the mines that explode and bring carnage and ruin to Vietnam. The encounter of man and God is an encounter within the world. We meet within a situation of shared suffering, of shared responsibility. This is implied in believing in one God in whose eyes there is no dichotomy of here and there, of me and them. So what is he answering? He's answering the question of, you're a rabbi in New York. What do you care about what happens in South Vietnam? You're a rabbi. Talk about Shabbos. Talk about Yontif. Talk about Kashrus. And what does he say? There's no such thing as here and there. There's no such thing as me and them. This is what it means to believe in one God. The whole world is under God's protection, right? God's responsibility. They and I are one. Here is there is here. What goes on over there happens even here. Oceans divide us. God's presence unites us. And God is present wherever man is afflicted. And all of humanity is embroiled in every agony, wherever it may be. He didn't make any friends. You get the picture? There's an uncompromising intensity to his prophetic ethic, which you'd expect from a person who lost his whole family to Hitler in Europe. And you'd expect, but we've gotten used, see, what he was afraid of is you've gotten used to a religion of compromise, a religion of amelioration, a religion of what he would call mediocrity. And for him, his job was to bring back the intensity of what faith demands when it encounters an ethical situation in the world. And that's what you hear at every one of these ethical addresses in the world, because every time he's imagining how God looks at this. How does God read? How does God read the events of our world, right? How does God read what goes on in our world? And he feels that pathos. That's what he's discussing. You have a sense in which he's internalized his own definition of prophecy. So here is a remarkable soul who allows us to see the world through the eyes of an incredibly sensitive and of course, incredibly poetic and articulate religious mind. So let's stop. Any questions? I talked a lot, I'm sorry, I keep doing this, it's a bad habit. Brian?
This moral outrage in Vietnam, is that a sermon that he gave? Or
It's an address.
it's an address?
It was the opening address to a meeting of clergy and laity against the war. And it was an answer to the problem. There were members of the organization that told him to tone it down. That told him that, first of all, there were members of the Jewish community who told him he didn't have a right to protest the war because it would be bad for the Jews, it would attract anti-Semitism. There were members of his academic community that told him he's a rabbi and should spend his time talking about Jewish things and why care about people far away in Asia. But most of all, it was an answer to the moderates in the clergy in the organization that were telling him that we shouldn't be demanding an immediate end to the war. We should be more, allow the government to figure out how to gain peace with honor. Okay? 1969 means Nixon's president. Remember Nixon? Yeah, and peace with honor. And peace with honor meant a gradual withdrawal of soldiers from Vietnam.
This sounds a lot like the speech Martin Luther King gave.
Yeah, they're friends.
A year before he got assassinated.
They're friends, and they're associated in this. Exactly right. But so Heschel is talking with a sense of, he's rejecting the moderates because he's saying, you're compromising with evil. You're compromising with destruction. You're compromising with death. I mean, and it's an interesting question. I mean, it's a very powerful, I mean, in 1975, North Vietnam took over South Vietnam anyway, right? And all that has, all kinds of issues. It never became a satellite state of the Chinese because the Vietnamese and the Chinese hate each other to start with. So the question, there's this intensity that he brings to all of his ethical dilemmas. And that's what I wanted you to hear. But that first line, that belongs on a card on your desk. You wake up in the morning and discover you're living in an insane asylum. Right? Right?
Interesting that we're discussing all these different wars on December the 7th.
Oh, that's right. It's Pearl Harbor Day today, yeah. Pearl Harbor Day, yeah. No, that's right. That's right. And there was an election yesterday in the state of Georgia between two very interesting men. I don't know if I'm entitled to speak about it, but it was, anyway, just.
You're already in trouble.
I know.
Doesn't that take us back a few years to the speech that Sherman you gave on Trump?
Did I give a speech about 4 years. Yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
You didn't forget that, huh?
No, I haven't forgotten it.
What would he be writing about today, you think?
Oh, gosh. What would he be writing about today? That's a wonderful question, Brian. Thank you. What would he be writing about today?
We still have wars.
Yeah, I think I'm afraid to impose my own prejudices. One of the things that I think he would be writing about is climate change. And because I think that, I look at climate change as the issue of this moment, and our stubborn inability to recognize what we're doing to the planet and what the planet is about to do to us. I don't think that any of us can estimate the social disruptions and catastrophes that are coming, because seas will rise, climate patterns will change, water routes will change. We're living through a big drought here in LA, and there's an article in the paper which should have given you the willies that the Colorado River is drying up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we drink. And if it don't go, there's no other source of water. The LA River is, well, I wouldn't count on it, put it that way. And I don't understand why there isn't a sense of urgency and shock to what's going on. But I think that'd be one of the things he'd write. I think so. And then, the whole, I don't want to be too pushy here, but the whole attack on democracy around the world, right? The dictators, the right-wing dictators, the right-wing
the whole rise of a radical right, I think would give him pause. You know, I think that's what he would talk about, but, you know, the persistence of racism in America, racial prejudice, of all kinds of prejudice in America. So I think these are the things that would give him pause. I think so, from reading his other stuff. You know, and talking to his daughter. His daughter's a friend of ours. Susie Heschel. Did I tell you the story about Susie Heschel? So Susie Heschel came to teach in Texas when Nina and I lived there, so we met her and got close to her. So occasionally we speak, and she's a very, very special soul. A very sensitive person. I think those are the things, you know, and then the attack on democracy in this country, I think would scare the heck out of him. Scare the heck out of me, so. I think, I don't want to project onto him my own prejudices, but I think that's what he would be worried about.
Maybe it would remind him of his childhood.
Who knows? Yeah. Who else has a question? I can be evasive. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think that you have to be careful when you speak about politics.
Yes, sir.
I think that Heschel is not going to say you should vote for so-and-so or this and that.
Correct.
He is going to talk about moral issues,
Yes, sir.
and you make your decisions on who you're going to support on the basis of the moral issue that he is presenting.
I think that's a very good way to put it. Based on moral principles and moral issues, without becoming partisan in politics, I think is a very useful dichotomy, a very useful distinction to make. A very useful. He didn't endorse candidates. He didn't join political parties. He never advertised his political affiliations, but he was firmly against the war, and he was viciously against racism. And I think it gives you a clue of where he might be thinking. I think he was, frankly, though, if I could say so, because he's articulating a prophetic ethic, an ethic of the prophets. When you read the Bible, the prophets were a pain in the neck to all of the kings, because kings have to make practical decisions, and the prophets were always critical of the practical decisions that kings had to make. Because kings have to deal with the realities of politics and the realities of the world, and prophets are much more theoretical. And Heschel is a prophet in the sense that he's demanding, he's intense in his passion for justice without really taking into consideration what it takes, you know, and what it takes to do that in the real world, right? He was very impatient. I know he was very impatient. If you read this essay on race and religion, he's very impatient with, for example, all of the preachers and rabbis and ministers and priests of religion who were preaching an ameliorist approach to racial issues in the South. Let's go slow. Let's slowly desegregate. And he was very unimpressed with John Kennedy, because today we make Kennedy into some sort of an idol. But at the time, Kennedy is a very practical politician. And while, you know, he took certain steps in order to desegregate the South, he was very reticent, very hesitant, because he didn't want to lose Southern votes in the 1964 election. Lyndon Johnson was different. I mean, Lyndon Johnson was much more forceful in pushing desegregation, in pushing integration, in pushing the voting rights bill through Congress.
And he knew it, the South became Republican.
As the South became Republican, and the country gained civil rights. I mean, so it's a very interesting question. So Heschel is preaching a prophetic ethic which is not practical, but he's pushing politicians in that direction. So I think in some sense, all politicians would be upset with him, and he would be upset with all politicians. Okay? So if you were to ask Abraham Heschel today, tell me about homelessness in LA, you can only imagine the wonderful sermon you'd hear. But solving the problem of homelessness is a very complicated economic and social job. He would not be interested in the practicalities of that. He would be interested in worse. He would be interested, or better,
in the insidious evil of leaving 61,000 people to sleep outside on a freezing cold night like tonight. And you would get a sermon which made you feel just terrible about that. That's how he would do it. There's no practicality to this. It's simply, let's recognize the moral principle. I think you said it so nicely. The moral principle that's involved in this. And let's embrace that moral principle in all of its power. That, I think, is exactly what he would do. That's exactly how he would look at it. Now, that's interesting. What would he say about Israeli politics? Now, he had a lot of nice things to say about Israel. He wrote a book about Israel. Because after telling us that Judaism is about sacred time, not sacred space, so comes the Six-Day War in 1967, and everybody goes to Jerusalem and worships at the wall, and he has to reconsider this idea of sacred space. He really doesn't do it. The name of the book is Israel, an Echo of Eternity. Now, an echo of eternity means that what makes Israel a sacred place is that it evokes sacred moments, not that the place itself is sacred. But he didn't talk about Israeli politics at all. That really wasn't in his wheelhouse. That wasn't what he talked about. It'd be really interesting to know what he'd say about this government, for example, what he'd say about what we do on the West Bank. I mean, these are really interesting kinds of questions. I don't know. This Israeli government is going to be very interesting to watch. So I don't want to go any farther than that. Other questions? Anybody? Brian, go ahead.
We could do this all night.
No, please don't. I want to go home.
In the spirit of duality, right?
Yeah.
I was talking with somebody who was in reference to our community right here.
Yeah.
Okay? And he said that there's a certain group of us that just want to daven, pray, and there's another group of us that believe in tikkun olam, right? Want to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm kind of getting the sense that would be an offensive duality to somebody like Heschel.
Yes. The idea that you just want to pray and you're oblivious to what goes on in the world. I mean, that line he had at the end here about that the encounter of man and God is an encounter within the world. What he's trying to say is that you can't run away from the world into a realm of religion. That's not legitimate. That's not how God wants us to live in the world.
So in a couple of months, we're going to do Pesach.
Good.
Right?
Is it really a couple of months? Oh, never. Okay. Start your shopping now, right?
And we're going to talk about all this stuff about when we were slaves in Egypt.
Right.
How do we bring that in? How do we turn that into action?
That's a beautiful question. That's a great question. I mean, the question is, what does the Passover story say to the world you live in right this minute? It's a wonderful, wonderful question. And I always try to find stuff for my Seder, because I have young kids at my Seder, and I want to push them hard. So I always bring stuff to the Seder, and we read it together. So a couple of years ago, there was a wonderful book by the African-American writer Ta-Nehisi what's it? Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates, A Letter to My Son. And he's an African-American journalist, and he has a 15-year-old son whom he's terrified for, obviously, because African-American kids are getting gunned down. And he writes this story about his own experience, and he talks about, what he carries in his body and how he's seen by outsiders. And it was I can send it as a selection from that I put into my Haggadah that year. And every year we come back to this and read that. I also read a section from Martin Luther King's letters from the Birmingham jail. And so King goes to jail, and he writes a letter, especially to the Birmingham, during the bus boycott, the Birmingham Ministers Association, who told him, not so fast, go slowly, don't make waves. And he writes this statement. So I think that these questions of race, these questions of justice, are very important to raise at a Seder table. I don't see how you can speak the truth about Passover without doing that, without referring to the world that you live in. I don't think Heschel can see how you can do that. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And then the question is, what conclusions do we draw? What does it call upon us to do in the world?
So this is a powerful, powerful question to ask.
I think that book is one of the books that some people want to ban in Florida.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure. I was only sorry they didn't ban my book. I thought it deserved to be banned. I mean, come on, for God's sakes. Put me on the same list with To Kill a Mockingbird and Man's Search for Meaning, and, I mean, come on. Somebody work that out for me. Would you please get my book banned in Florida, for God's sakes? All right, so here's the last thing we'll say. Next Sunday, which is the 11th, it's this Sunday, Cantor Barron is presenting a beautiful program of music based on Heschel's writings. Please come, support the concert. It's very, very good. Okay, thank you for learning with me. It's been great. We will... 8 cantors and 10 pieces. Chad, Gad, yeah. And then in January, when Rabbi Leibowitz gets back, he's going to be teaching a series on one of his spiritual heroes, who's Rav Kook, great Israeli mystic and philosopher. So please come and learn with that. Take care, everyone. Stay well. Have a quiet Wednesday night. It's very cold outside, so be careful.
But there's still hot coffee and hot tea out there and cookies.
Somebody explain to me this mystery.
Oh, sorry.
45 degrees in Chicago is considered a warm fall afternoon. 57 degrees in LA is considered frigid. I don't understand what it is.